Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, a big thank you once again for all your kind words out there. I am thankfully back on the mend after my brush with COVID, and I'm beginning to feel a little bit more, dare I say, resilient. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to talk about resilience in the tech industry today. And a company called Insight Partners recently appeared on my radar when they released a report that highlighted the resilience of software ScaleUp's and also revealed research around how software scale-up and graduates of startups are catalyzing economic growth and fueling job creation amid widespread economic hardship. It's great to have a bit of a positive side to things, but the longer I talk, the more I run the risk of a coughing fit. So enough from me. Let's get today's guest on. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to New York City so we can speak with Lonne Jaffe from Insight Partners about resilience and the process of scaling and the factors enabling rapid business growth right now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Thanks for having me on, Neil. So my name is Lonne Jaffe. I'm a managing director at Insight Partners, a large technology growth investor based in New York City. I joined about 4 years ago after being CEO of an Insight portfolio company, which was called SyncSort at the time and is now called Precisely. And I also spent about 13 years at IBM before that. And at Insight, I've had a focus on some of the deeper technology investments that we've done. So I've invested in companies in areas like machine learning, cybersecurity, collaboration software, healthcare tech, software infrastructure, things like that. And to give you a sense of some of the companies I work with, I'm on the boards of Tractable, which uses machine learning image recognition to figure out how much it'll cost to repair a damaged vehicle based on a photo. So insurance companies can use it to settle claims faster and help end customers recover from accidents more quickly. And I'm also on the board of another company called Central Reach, which has advanced electronic medical record software for autism treatment clinics. And it uses powerful analytics to help improve care. So that gives you a little bit of a flavor of it.
Wow, I thought I span a lot of plates. You're an incredibly busy guy. And Insight Partners is an American venture capital and private equity firm for our international listeners that is best known, I think, for investing in growth stage technology based in, and like you said, you are based in New York City. But so can you tell me a little bit more about what you do and the kind of tech firms that you're investing in right now?
So that's right. Yeah. Insight Partners is a growth stage technology investor. And we've raised through a series of funds a bit more than $30 billion in capital commitments over the years. And we've invested in over 400 high growth technology companies across the world. So these are investments that have been mostly software companies or internet-based companies that leverage software at their core. So for example, Twitter or Alibaba, which are maybe not technically software companies, but they have software DNA. And the basic mission at Insight is to work with the best founders and executives. And we give them the kinds of help when they ask for it, right? So we also stay out of their way when they don't need help. But we give them the kind of help that a business unit within a larger multinational corporation might get from its corporate parent, right? So for example, we have a team called Insight Onsite, which is made up of over 70 full-time operating experts that are organized a bit like the functional departments within a larger software company. So these are teams of people who can help with things like scaling a business, sales, technology architecture, marketing, how to do acquisitions, how to grow internationally, hiring. And each one of these functions, like sales and marketing, has specialists in it on different topics. So like we have a full-time pricing and packaging expert within our sales center of excellence. And within our marketing center of excellence, we give portfolio companies access to a team that can help them build product marketing materials. Why are we focused on software? Well, the short answer is that it's because software is everywhere, right? So it basically underpins the entire global macroeconomic system now. if you compare the software industry to other segments that people have traditionally thought of as being large, like banking or telecommunications, which have tended to have just a few really big companies, the software market is special in that it continues to create more billion-dollar winners than pretty much any other industry, past or present. In fact, at some point, it may not even make sense to talk about software as a distinct industry since it's becoming such a huge portion of all the other industries. If you think about companies like Netflix and entertainment or Amazon and retail, which are really software companies. The other interesting thing about it as an investment category is that software is incredibly scalable, right? It can be distributed over the internet at really low cost. If a team builds a powerful piece of software like Gmail, for example, it can be accessed by billions of people, right? In the old days, if you built a piece of machinery, it could maybe be accessed by a few dozen people at a time. And that means that a relatively small amount of investment software can make an enormous number of people productive. And as a knock-on effect, it can unlock entirely new business models and even large pools of labor in diverse geographies.
Incredibly cool. And one of the reasons I was excited to invite you on the podcast today was because Insight Partners also recently released a report that highlights the resilience of software scale-ups and research around how software scale-ups graduate of startups are actually catalyzing economic growth and fueling job creation amid widespread economic hardship. But can I ask that you offer an overview on the thinking behind the report and who it was that you surveyed?
Sure. Yeah. So Insight Partners commissioned and funded the report, and the work was actually done by Wakefield Research. Okay. And the primary goal of it was to study, somewhat academically, the impact that scale-ups have on the global economy. And so the research included both a quantitative survey of a few hundred global software leaders, and it also had a qualitative component, which was like in-depth interviews of scale-up executives. And the background for it was that people often talk about how startups are important for job creation and how they're the foundation of innovation. And of course, it's true. Like all good companies start out as startups, and startups are hugely important to the economy. But many startups fail. And in some kinds of economic downturns, they can run out of cash extremely quickly. And with younger startups, while they're working to find their own product market fit and to experiment with different business models, it often makes sense for them to be pretty frugal and to control spending. And if you're being careful with spending, you're probably not hiring lots of people. And much less academic attention has been paid to the next stage in the company lifecycle, what we've been referring to as the scale-up stage. The growth rate in the report and the revenue cutoff that was used for scale-ups was somewhat arbitrary out of necessity. But the idea is that they're substantive enough to apply material resource to research and development and go to market, but they're still going through very rapid growth. We used a $10 million threshold. And we have this concept that successful startups graduate into scale-ups as they achieve product market fit and they have repeatable business models that can absorb both human capital and financial capital productively. So they end up just being much more prepared to weather a storm than smaller startups or larger, slower growing, less innovative, less adaptable, more mature companies. To give you an example of a company that's going through the startup to scale up transition right now. So one of my most recent investments is a company called Run AI. So it's an incredible founding team, fantastic deep tech intellectual property, huge market. Basically every enterprise today is either re-architecting themselves to be built around machine learning systems, or they should be, right? And how the power works, that Run AI product, if you're doing deep learning model training or inference and you're using specialty hardware like graphics processing units or similar chipsets, you just drop in Run AI's product and the system will get faster and cheaper. And since launching in May of last year, they've doubled their customers every quarter. And so they're still pretty young as a business, but they're already scaling out internationally, growing their go-to-market team pretty rapidly. And so that's when all the infrastructure that Insight Partners has at the fund level starts to get unlocked as being useful to them.
And the report also really drives home the resilience of software scale-ups and their outsized impact on the global economy, all through job retention and growth during a period of economic distress that we'll find ourselves with. And one of the stats that stood out was, I think, 81% of scale-up companies are expecting to maintain or increase headcount in 2021. I mean, it's a great stat, but can you expand on that for the listeners?
Yeah. So, I mean, first, I'll say that it's important to focus on the quality of growth, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to be purchasing dollar bills with $10 bills and to get excited about all those dollar bills you're collecting as revenue. And the idea of revenue quality has a lot of ingredients in it. And so, what I mean by quality are things like high gross margins, recurring revenue with like really high customer retention rates, rapid expansion within customers. Trends in revenue quality are also important. So things like improving unit economics and decreasing customer acquisition costs over time. They all signal good sustainability and potential for future cash flows. And if you have strong network effects, for example, like a marketplace business, this doesn't show up as an asset on the balance sheet, right? Accountants are conservative on topics like that for very good reasons. Right? You can't sell your network effects to another company if you need cash. But the network effects are still obviously valuable, and they can make it easier to grow more quickly. And all of these returns to scale can mean that the scale-up growth rates can continue to accelerate year after year. And as the scale-ups grow, there are just a lot of returns to scale, right? You can spend more on research and development. You can spend more on brand marketing. There's barriers to entries like network effects, data moats for machine learning businesses, where prediction systems can improve as they get more training data and feedback data. The build out of platform ecosystems or marketplace can make the product more valuable as more people start using it. And I would also just say that when you're talking about growth rates, the question of how long the high growth can last is also hugely important. Right? We spend a lot of time thinking about this topic as we're thinking through investments at the Insight Partners Investment Committee. Essentially, how long can the high growth last? Right? And sometimes the impact of high growth rates compounded over time is really hard to wrap your mind around. If a scale up grows at 50% a year for 10 years, it's 50 times larger. But if it grows at 50% per year for 20 years, it's over 3,000 times larger. Right? And if you can maintain operating leverage at those scales like Google or Amazon did since the early 2000s, the sustainable returns can be incredible, not just for employees and customers, but also for shareholders. We have a portfolio company, Recorded Future, that has cybersecurity models that can predict the likelihood of product vulnerabilities being exploited by cyber attackers. And it can do things like assess the risk that a specific internet IP address will behave maliciously, right? Even if no one has ever seen it behave strangely in the past. And as they continue to scale rapidly at Recorded Future, all of the customers inherit the improvements in the cybersecurity predictions as more people use it, kind of like developing herd immunity in a pandemic, and it helps them all protect themselves against cyber attack. And essentially, the product just gets better as it gets more usage.
And I'm curious, what were the big takeaways from the report for you?
Yeah, so the main takeaway for us was that policymakers need to understand that scale-ups are where the job growth happens. Yeah. Right? There's a lot that can be done at the national and local level to encourage the growth of scale-ups once they're recognized as an important part of the economy. During the 2006 to 2009 period, the Great Recession, while the US unemployment rate was skyrocketing, scale-ups were about 2% of all the companies, but the scale-ups created 35% of all the gross job gains from the companies that survived and hired during the period. In 2020 of this past year, from May to August, during the peak of the COVID-19 shutdowns, there were an average of 3,500 open roles in the Insight Partners portfolio companies. So like the general economy is used to 1% to 2% inflation, right? But in technology, we're typically expecting continuous massive price decreases all the time, right? Hard drive prices have dropped from around $500,000 a gigabyte in 1981 to less than a couple of cents per gigabyte today. And as things like the internet and mobile technology become cheap and ubiquitous, new business models become possible, some of which can unlock labor at hard to reach places like Upwork, or previously untapped labor like ride-sharing services like Uber or Lyft. We have a portfolio company, Glia, for example, which provides digital customer service products. So it lets companies like banks or credit unions have rich digital interactions with their banking customers over chat, video, or co-browsing. So like navigating their online banking or website together with a customer service person. And about 50% of consumers used online banking before COVID. Within a month or two of the lockdowns, it was something like 75% of consumers were using online banking. And of the ones that were first-time users, almost all of them said that they would continue to use it post-COVID, right? And so consumer habits can change in a permanent way after 18 months of doing something. And then for the banks and the credit unions, there was a fixed cost effort to implement something like Glia when the pandemic started. But now that they have this like incredible, rich, immersive digital experience available for their customers on their website, are they going to unplug it all when their branches reopen? Of course not, right? It's like they pulled forward many years of adoption into an 18-month period. And then, they helped their customers weather the storm and the end consumers as well. And now they can all enjoy the supply side economies of scale and network effects.
And obviously, you're working right in the heart of the industry here, and you're familiar with the topic and a lot of the insights from the report. But I'm curious, did anything surprise you in that at all?
So one finding in the report that surprised me a bit was the fact that the founders and execs who were surveyed thought that the scaling up stage was actually the most challenging part of a company's journey, even more so than the startup stage, which is obviously very hard, or the mature grown-up stage, which has its own set of challenges. And one reason for this may be that ScaleUp's are at a moment of transition, right? So you need to start recruiting domain experts instead of generalists. You need to stay agile, but also have like robust processes around sales, marketing, legal, human capital. You need to start bringing in new leaders, sometimes at more senior levels than early employees who have been very loyal and have been with you since the beginning, without demoralizing those employees and retaining them. You need to maintain high performance cultures that people want to be part of, even as the headcount is increasing really rapidly. If you're growing at 300% per year, 2/3 of your employees are new every year, right? Which is kind of crazy to think about, often in different geographies. One example from telehealth, so if you're going to see a doctor remotely, right? So if all you have for telehealth is a video chat, there's only so much you can do, right? And during the pandemic, there was a time when, like in April of 2020, when all of a sudden everybody couldn't go to the hospital or doctor anymore for any reason other than COVID. And there's a lot of knock-on effects of that. People who have high blood pressure, people who have high cholesterol, people who have diabetes, not getting their checkups, chronic risk populations, families with small children. So we invested in the pandemic in a company called TytoCare that has a FDA-approved multi-purpose healthcare device with a whole bunch of subcomponents in it. So things like a stethoscope and a thermometer and a tongue depressor and a pulse oximeter which measures blood oxygen saturation, a blood pressure cuff, and an otoscope, which is that thing that doctors use to look in your ears. And it's all integrated with a camera, and it's connected via secure HIPAA-compliant channels over Wi-Fi. And so it's like not as good as an in-person visit, of course, but it really does allow for a quality of remote care that wouldn't otherwise be realistic. And we invested in them last year at the beginning of the pandemic, and then there was such a huge demand spike that they were seeing that we invested even more in them at the beginning of this year to be able to meet all of that demand.
Incredibly cool. And one of the things that really stood out for me in the report was the paradigm shift towards investors that provide more than just capital. And by that, I mean a shared vision. But is that something you can expand on for the listeners too?
Yeah. I mean, by the time a company is a scale up, the choice of investor for them is as much a hiring decision for them as it is a capital raise. Not to say that the capital isn't useful, but rapidly growing companies that scale require a different kind of support system than startups. And one of the reasons why they're raising capital is to have someone aligned with them, incentive-wise, who can be helpful. I already talked about Insight Onsite, the ScaleUp engine that provides support around things like product and tech, sales, marketing, and strategy. We also have another program called Insight Ignite, which is a network of people and hundreds of curated events, usually in person when there isn't a global pandemic going on. But of course, it's all been remote this year. And these are curated events that connect the large consumers of software, often people at large multinational corporations, with the innovation coming out of our portfolio companies. And so we'll run things like growth advisory boards, innovation briefings, roundtables at interesting locations. And for our portfolio companies, they get to participate in this huge relationship management infrastructure, the cost of which is amortized over hundreds of our portfolio companies. And for the buyers, they learn about companies where the world is just doing a lot of the diligence for them, because by the time we're investing in a business, like it's hitting on all cylinders, and it's even if they don't need to buy the technology, they should at least be learning about it. And that kind of relationship management infrastructure really levels the playing field between our portfolio companies and the larger multinational tech companies. And then another tool in the innovation toolkit that gets unlocked at the startup stage, I would say, is the ability to do acquisitions. And we have a whole team of dozens of analysts who can help our portfolio companies do acquisitions because they don't usually have their own corporate development teams. For example, one of the companies I'm on the board of, Aqua Security, which is the scale-up leader for cloud-native developer-centric security software, they've been really active with M&A. And when they acquire a company, like they acquired the commercial open source startup CloudSploit, it wasn't an exit for CloudSploit. Rather, that the team and technology in CloudSploit were basically fusing with Aqua's broader platform, which still has most of its potential for growth ahead, and it has a culture of respect for open source. So it's actually, in some ways, a little easier for our portfolio companies to do acquisitions because they can acquire companies where the founders and investors don't want to exit, as opposed to larger companies who are kind of constrained to only acquiring businesses that do want to exit, which is not all the good companies.
And if we were to zoom out for a few moments, how will the findings from the report help you guys at Insight Partners and especially around making future investments? Is that information invaluable to all that? I would imagine it is.
Yeah. I mean, when the COVID-19 crisis first hit, many people and companies were experiencing incredible levels of hardship, change, and confusion. And originally we and a lot of our portfolio companies thought that basically the whole portfolio is going to have to tighten its belts, right? Reduce expenses, conserve cash to make it through the crisis. And we were all bracing for significant declines in top line revenue. We thought we were going to pull back on our investments and spend a lot of time working with our existing portfolio. But really, that hasn't been the way things played out in the technology space at all. Most of our portfolio companies were surprisingly resilient, and a lot of them actually experienced extraordinary growth rates throughout the pandemic in a way that doesn't seem to be temporary. And as a follow-on effect of that, helped other companies survive because of the nature of the technology, the kind of thing that they were doing. And as a firm, Insight actually deployed more capital and did more deals in 2020 than we did in 2019. So if you see, what's happening is we were actually just having more conviction. So if you see a tech company with rapid month-over-month growth, with high gross margins, high retention rates, declining customer acquisition costs in the middle of a global pandemic and associated financial crisis, it's just such a strong signal that customers love the product. And so I think probably the best way to think about how, or look at how we're going to make future investments is through the lens of some of the recent investments we've made. We just invested in a company called Theator, which is a surgical intelligence platform that uses AI and computer vision to improve surgeon performance. We invested in a company called Imperfect Foods, which is grocery delivery of fresh produce and other groceries that are imperfect. And so they basically don't have a traditional shape to them. And so that helps to eliminate food waste. And I led an investment recently in a company called Single Store, which is essentially an all-in-one SQL database that has elastic cloud scaling. And it's used for the kind of applications that we've been starting to call operational analytics. So these are live analytics and artificial intelligence applications that are powered by extremely fresh data, like a recommendation engine, where the learning is happening in real time. And when scale-ups like these really work, they can create an entirely new market, or take an existing market and make it orders of magnitude larger than it is today, like what Uber and Lyft did to the traditional taxi and car service industry. And the findings in the report basically speak to the resilience of scale-ups and the positive impact that these companies can have on the technology industry and the broader macroeconomic system.
Well, I've loved chatting with you today. But before I do let you go, for anyone listening that would like to download that report and look at some of those insights themselves, what's the best way of finding it? And also best way of finding you online and contacting your team if they've got any questions?
Yeah, so the report we've been talking about is online at Insight Partners' website at insightpartners.com. And you can also find links to a few of the other topics I've been talking about at my Twitter account, which is at Lonne J, or LONNEJ.
Excellent. Well, I'll add the links on the blog post just so people can find that nice and easily. There's so much great stuff hidden in that report. And like I said, more than anything, it shows that a segment of the high growth software companies known as ScaleUp's are actually catalyzing economic growth and fueling innovation and job creation, all despite the economic fallout from COVID-19. And man, we all need a bit of good news right now. So I thank you for taking a few moments to sit down with me today, share some of that great news and also some of the insights in that report. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me on, Neil. Really enjoyed the conversation.
a big message from that report for me was move over startups. ScaleUp's are now proving to be more resilient and the real catalyst of economic growth. And that new report from the leading software investor reveals that ScaleUp's are poised for high growth and strong return, with an incredible 85% of scaling-focused software companies expecting annual revenue growth rates to increase over the next 3 years. Intriguing topic, and I'd love to hear more about your insights, your experiences, if ScaleUp's is something that you're particularly well versed in. So please, as always, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk, and you can send me a DM on social channels such as LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, just at Neil C. Hughes. So a big thank you for your patience over the last couple of weeks. I know we have a lot of different listeners coming from all over the world, and I have been feeling a little under the weather, but that is changing. And a big thank you to each and every one of you for quite literally giving me a reason to jump out of bed in the morning. Hopefully you'll join me again tomorrow. So a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.